Hey guys, tonight we're going to travel deep into the world of indigenous medicine. Imagine the forest wrapping around you as the sounds of nature fill the air. The trees, the rustling leaves, and the distant murmur of a stream create a calm that starts to seep into your bones. You're not just in the forest, you're with it, surrounded by its ancient wisdom. The air smells like damp earth and pine, and there's a coolness that touches your skin as you walk among the towering trees. It feels like every step you take is taking you closer to something profound, something that connects you to the land and its long history of healing. The story you're about to hear might surprise you, and it will definitely make you rethink how we look at the medicine we rely on today. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And go ahead, drop where you're tuning in from, and let me know what time it is in your part of the world. I love hearing from you all. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In this quiet, living world, people have always understood the value of the forest. Not just for the food it provides, but for the medicine it holds within its trees, plants, and earth. Long before modern pharmacies and the shiny packaging of prescription bottles, there was something far more ancient at work. Indigenous tribes lived in perfect harmony with their environment, and nature itself was their ultimate provider. It wasn't just about gathering food, they relied on the plants, the roots, the barks, and the herbs around them to heal everything from broken bones to fevers. And the beauty is, they didn't just stumble upon these remedies. They knew exactly what they were looking for, and more importantly, they knew how to respect what the earth gave them. In fact, many of the medicines we use today owe their roots to indigenous healers, who were often the first to discover their properties. Take the humble willow tree, for instance. Its bark contains salicylic acid, which forms the base of what we know today as aspirin. Ancient healers knew that willow bark had the power to relieve pain, reduce inflammation, and lower fevers. They didn't need laboratory tests to prove its benefits. They understood its effects because they lived and worked closely with nature every day. Indigenous peoples didn't just find plants. They cultivated a relationship with them. Willow trees weren't just trees, they were a tool for survival. And they weren't the only plants that were used in this way. Then there's aloe vera. It's easy to think of it now as just a plant that soothes sunburns, but indigenous people used it for much more. From the ancient Egyptians to the indigenous tribes of the Americas, aloe was a universal remedy. They applied it to wounds, cuts, and burns because they knew that its soothing gel contained healing properties far beyond what the modern world recognized until centuries later. Aloe vera, like many other plants, was more than just a salve. It was a gift from the earth, nurtured and protected by those who understood its value. Historians still debate whether the knowledge of medicinal plants spread from one ancient culture to another or whether indigenous peoples across the globe independently discovered these healing powers. What's certain, though, is that this knowledge was passed down from one generation to the next, carefully cultivated and maintained. These healers were often considered the keepers of sacred knowledge, and their work extended far beyond curing ailments. They were integral to the fabric of the community, providing not only physical care but emotional and spiritual support as well. And their connection to the land was more than just practical. It was sacred. They saw the forest not as something to take from but something to respect and care for. And in return, nature provided for them. In a way, the relationship between indigenous peoples and the land was built on reciprocity. The land gave them everything they needed: food, shelter, and medicine. In return, they protected the land, ensuring that future generations would continue to have access to the same gifts. It was a delicate balance, one that modern society has long since forgotten in the rush for progress and profit. As we continue our journey into the world of indigenous medicine, we now delve deeper into the heart of plant-based healing. Imagine you're walking through the dense jungle of the Amazon, your footsteps soft on the ground as you make your way deeper into the lush greenery. The air is thick with humidity, the leaves dripping with moisture, and every breath you take feels charged with life. The foliage around you seems almost alive, as if the plants themselves are whispering secrets. As you walk, you can't help but notice how every tree, vine, and flower seems to hold potential, not just for sustenance, but for healing. To the indigenous tribes of the Amazon, and indeed to many indigenous peoples around the world, the forest is not just a source of food, shelter, and livelihood. It is a medicine cabinet, a vast and diverse collection of plants, herbs, and trees, each with its own specific remedy for the body, mind, and spirit. These tribes didn't need the laboratory tools of modern science. Instead, they relied on observation, trial and error, and most importantly, a deep, symbiotic relationship with the land to unlock the medicinal potential of nature. For them, the forest wasn't just a physical resource. It was a living, breathing entity, offering its gifts to those who knew how to listen. One of the most famous, yet complex, examples of this relationship is ayahuasca, an ancient healing brew made from two main plants, Banisteriopsis caapi, a vine, and Psychotria viridis, a shrub. This brew, consumed in sacred rituals, is well known for its psychoactive properties. However, its uses extend far beyond just spiritual exploration. For centuries, indigenous tribes in the Amazon have used ayahuasca to treat various physical ailments, including gastrointestinal problems, fever, and chronic pain. The psychoactive compounds in the plants open up deeper levels of consciousness, but more importantly, they provide access to visions that are believed to offer guidance and healing. Indigenous healers would prepare the brew with care, combining the two plants in specific ratios to ensure the correct effects. The vine itself is rich in harmine, a compound that acts as a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, MAOI, while the leaves of Psychotria viridis contain dimethyltryptamine, DMT, a powerful hallucinogenic substance. When consumed together, these plants create a powerful synergy, which allows the body to process the psychoactive properties of DMT while protecting the individual from its otherwise overwhelming effects. This combination creates an experience that many describe as deeply transformative, healing both physical ailments and emotional blockages, providing insight, clarity, and spiritual renewal. What's particularly remarkable about ayahuasca is the level of wisdom and understanding that indigenous tribes have about the plants they use. They don't just use these plants because they've been passed down through generations. They have an intricate understanding of how each plant interacts with the body, how the plants work together, and the sacred role they play in the healing process. In fact, many tribes view the ayahuasca vine as a sentient being, one that has consciousness and a deep connection to the spirit world. The ritual surrounding the preparation and consumption of ayahuasca isn't just about taking medicine. It's a spiritual journey, a communion with the vine and its spiritual entities. The healing process is as much about the connection to the divine as it is about the physical effects of the brew itself. While ayahuasca has gained considerable attention in the West due to its psychoactive properties and use in shamanic rituals, there are many other plants in the Amazon and around the world that have been used for centuries to heal the body in more mundane yet equally important ways. For instance, Sacha Inchi, often referred to as the Inca peanut, is a plant native to the Amazon basin that has been used for centuries not only as a food source but also for its medicinal benefits. The seeds of this plant are incredibly rich in omega-3 fatty acids, and modern research is beginning to show that it can help reduce cholesterol, improve heart health, and reduce inflammation. What's fascinating is that Sacha Inchi has been used for these same purposes by indigenous people for centuries, long before Western science could even begin to understand the mechanisms behind these effects. Another plant that is crucial to many Amazonian tribes is copaiba, a tree resin that has been used for centuries for its healing properties. The resin is harvested from the copaiba tree, and indigenous people have traditionally used it as an anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, and pain-relieving remedy. Copaiba resin is used in a variety of ways, whether it's in its pure form, mixed with other plant medicines, or in oil form to treat wounds, infections, and skin conditions. Modern science has confirmed many of the traditional uses of copaiba, and it's now being marketed as a natural remedy for inflammation, skin health, and even anxiety. Yet, the real wisdom comes from how the indigenous people recognized the tree's medicinal qualities, passed down through generations of healers, long before the arrival of modern medicine. Beyond the Amazon, other indigenous cultures have their own plants with unique healing properties. In North America, echinacea is one such example. Known for its ability to boost the immune system, echinacea was used by many indigenous tribes across North America, including the Great Plains and the Navajo, to treat infections, colds, and even snake bites. Today, echinacea is one of the most widely used herbal remedies for colds and flu, but its use has been known for centuries, often in the form of teas, tinctures, or poultices. The plant has become so commercialized that it's easy to forget its deep roots in indigenous knowledge. One of the most significant aspects of these practices is that indigenous people didn't just discover these plants by accident. They built a relationship with the land. They understood that the forest, the jungle, the mountains, and the plains were not just places to gather food. They were sacred spaces filled with wisdom and life. The plants were seen as living beings, each with its own energy and purpose. Healers didn't simply take from nature. They engaged in a symbiotic relationship, ensuring that plants were used sustainably, that knowledge was passed on responsibly, and that the health of the land was preserved. Even today, many indigenous communities maintain a deep reverence for the plants they use for healing. There's a spiritual aspect to the practice. Healers do not see themselves as separate from the plants they work with. They approach healing with a sense of gratitude and respect, often engaging in rituals to give thanks to the plants, trees, and even the earth itself. This is a critical aspect of their practice, something that's often overlooked by the Western world, which tends to view medicine as a transactional, clinical exchange. Indigenous healing, in contrast, is a way of life, an ongoing, respectful partnership between humanity and the natural world. Modern science has begun to catch up with this understanding, with many research projects focusing on the biochemical properties of plants that were long known to indigenous healers. Phytochemicals, compounds found in plants that have healing properties, are being studied for their ability to fight disease, reduce inflammation, and improve health. The healing potential of these plants is becoming increasingly recognized as we unlock the secrets they've been guarding for centuries. But even as modern science uncovers the hidden power of plants, it's important to remember that the knowledge of how to use these plants came from centuries of observation, experience, and spiritual connection. As we delve deeper into these plant medicines, we begin to realize that healing is not just about taking a pill or applying a salve. It's about understanding the interconnectedness of all things: the plants, the land, the people, and the spirit. Healing, in the indigenous sense, is holistic. It takes into account the body, mind, spirit, and the environment. By approaching health in this way, we can begin to understand the true power of nature and how these ancient practices can provide us with a path forward. What's fascinating is that much of what indigenous people knew instinctively about plants and nature is now being confirmed by modern science. It's a beautiful reminder that sometimes the answers to our most pressing health challenges are already out there, waiting to be discovered once again. As we continue our exploration of indigenous healing traditions, it's important to take a step back and examine the role of healing through the environment, specifically how the elements, earth, water, air, and fire, were utilized to promote health and wellness. While we've already seen how plants and herbs played a vital role in indigenous medicine, the power of nature goes much further than just what grows on the ground. The environment itself, the physical world in which these healers lived and interacted, was an active partner in the process of healing. In many indigenous cultures, the concept of balance is paramount. Health is not merely the absence of illness, it's the presence of harmony between all aspects of the individual, mind, body, spirit, and the world around them. The land isn't just a passive resource, it's a living entity that interacts with the people in profound ways. The healing powers of the natural elements were understood not just in a theoretical sense, but as an intrinsic part of how life itself unfolded. Each element had its own set of properties that contributed to the healing process, from the cooling and soothing powers of water to the cleansing warmth of fire. Imagine standing at the edge of a clear river in a lush forest, watching the water rush over the smooth stones. Indigenous peoples across the globe have long believed in the healing powers of water. In many cultures, rivers, lakes, and springs were considered sacred, often thought to contain healing spirits or life force. It wasn't just the physical act of drinking or bathing in these waters that promoted healing. It was about the connection to the land and the belief in the water's deeper spiritual significance. For example, in the Amazon, indigenous healers used water-based re for pub, immersing them spirit W and rest rituals were done in unison. The practice of sweat lodges is a noth sweat has spiritual rebirth. Similarly, water in other parts of the world was seen as a vital healing tool. For instance, many indigenous peoples in North America, such as the Navajo, believed that water was a gift from the holy people and was essential for physical and spiritual wellness. They used water for ceremonial cleansings, such as the water ceremony, where individuals would bathe in sacred rivers to promote emotional and spiritual healing. The belief in water's power to restore balance also extends to the way it's incorporated into healing practices. The very act of immersing oneself in water can be meditative, allowing one to reset and align their energy with the natural world. Turning our attention to fire, it might seem like an element that is more often associated with destruction than healing, but to indigenous cultures, fire held a sacred and healing role. The practice of fire rituals was common across various tribes, with fire being used to purify, to offer warmth, and to release negative energy. Think of the ancient practice of using fire as a tool for ritual cleansing. The heat of the fire was believed to burn away impurities, not just from the body, but from the soul. Fire ceremonies were often used in times of transition, whether in personal rites of passage or during times of crisis or disease. In many ways, fire acted as a catalyst for change, both physically and spiritually. In the sweat lodge, as we touched upon earlier, the heat and steam created by hot stones and water would produce intense temperatures, causing participants to sweat out toxins. But the heat wasn't just about detoxification, it was symbolic of transformation. The ritual wasn't just about sweating out illness but also about purging negative emotions, allowing individuals to confront inner struggles and emerge from the experience renewed. The fire that heated the stones in the lodge wasn't merely functional, it was also considered a source of spiritual transformation, helping people release emotional burdens and return to a balanced state. Air, too, played a crucial role in the healing process. In many indigenous cultures, the breath was sacred. The idea of breath as a carrier of life force was central to many healing practices. Breath work, or controlled breathing, was used in many indigenous cultures to calm the mind, restore focus, and restore balance within the body. In fact, many spiritual practices around the world, including those of indigenous peoples, involve deep, rhythmic breathing as a way to connect with the spiritual world and promote inner peace. One notable example is the practices of the Native American sweat lodge, where rhythmic breathing was used to complement the physical effects of the heat. As the body sweated and released toxins, the breath acted as a tool for spiritual and emotional cleansing. Chanting and breathing together also created a sense of community, reinforcing the idea that healing wasn't just an individual pursuit, but a communal one. In the presence of others, breathing became a unifying act, binding people together in their shared experience of healing. In the Pacific Northwest, indigenous tribes used breathwork as a part of their healing ceremonies. Deep, slow breathing was used in tandem with ritual drumming and chanting to align the energy of the individual with the natural world. This practice was believed to create harmony and balance, fostering emotional and spiritual healing in the process. The rhythmic breathwork would align with the sound of the drums, creating a symbiotic rhythm between the individual and the earth. This connection was seen as essential for true healing. Perhaps the most important thing to remember about these elements of nature, fire, water, air, and earth, is that they were not just used as physical resources. They were understood to be living, breathing entities with spiritual significance. Indigenous healers didn't view the environment as something external to themselves. They viewed it as a partner in the healing process. Everything in nature was interconnected, and health was about maintaining balance with that natural world. The very elements of nature were thought to hold the power to restore harmony, not just in the body but in the spirit. This holistic view of healing is something that modern medicine often overlooks. We treat the body and mind as separate entities, using medicine to fight disease without considering the spiritual or emotional implications of illness. But the indigenous perspective teaches us that healing is more than just the absence of disease. It is about restoring balance in all aspects of life. The earth, the air, the water, and the fire are not just physical elements to be exploited. They are living forces that support our health, our well-being, and our connection to the universe. As we continue to look at these healing traditions, we see how important it is to recognize and integrate the lessons of balance, symbiosis, and holistic care into modern practices. From ecotherapy to breathwork and nature-based healing, we are beginning to reconnect with the wisdom that indigenous cultures have practiced for thousands of years. This reconnection to nature is more than just a trend. It is a way to restore our balance, our health, and our connection to the world around us. Now that we've explored how the elements of nature, earth, water, air, and fire, played an integral role in indigenous healing, let's shift our focus to the role of spirituality in these healing traditions. In the modern world, we often think of health as something that can be measured, treated, and fixed, whether it's a cold, a broken bone, or an illness diagnosed in a clinical setting. We separate the body from the mind and the spirit. But for many indigenous cultures, healing was never purely a physical process. It was a spiritual one, too. In these traditions, the health of the body was intrinsically tied to the health of the soul, and both required attention for full healing to occur. Imagine you are sitting in a circle with others from your community. The air is thick with the scent of burning herbs, like sage or cedar, and the rhythmic beat of drums fills the space. The shaman, a spiritual guide and healer, stands at the center of the circle, calling upon the spirits of the ancestors to help restore balance to the person who is ill. The focus is not just on the physical ailment. Instead, the shaman seeks to heal the spirit, clear away negative energy, and bring peace to the mind. This process is just as important, if not more so, than addressing the body's symptoms. In many indigenous cultures, illnesses were seen not just as physical afflictions but as manifestations of spiritual imbalance. If a person became ill, it was believed that something was wrong with their spirit, whether it was a disconnection from nature, unresolved emotional pain, or a spiritual imbalance. The healing process, therefore, began with restoring that spiritual balance. Physical remedies, like herbal medicine, were only a part of the healing process. Rituals, prayers, ceremonies, and connections with the spiritual world were often just as important in addressing the root causes of illness. This deep connection between body and spirit is what made shamanism such an essential part of indigenous healing. The shaman was not only a healer but also a spiritual leader, someone who could travel between the physical world and the spirit world to seek guidance. They used their knowledge of the land, its plants, and its energies, but they also had the ability to enter trance states, often induced by sacred plants like ayahuasca or peyote, to communicate with spirits. These spiritual encounters were believed to offer insight into the causes of illness and the steps needed for healing. In many cultures, rituals and ceremonies played a central role in this spiritual healing process. These could range from something as simple as a prayer or blessing to more elaborate ceremonies involving dance, chanting, fasting, and the consumption of sacred plants. The goal was to reconnect the individual with the spiritual forces that govern their health and well-being. These ceremonies were not just about treating symptoms. They were about restoring the balance between the person and the greater forces of nature and the spirit world. One of the most well-known spiritual practices is the use of sweat lodges. The sweat lodge ceremony was an ancient purification ritual used by many indigenous groups, particularly in North America. This ceremony involved entering a small, enclosed structure that was heated by hot stones. Water was poured over the stones, creating steam, which made the air thick and hot. The heat was intended to purify the body by making the individual sweat, but it was also a deeply spiritual experience. Inside the lodge, participants would pray, chant, and reflect on their lives. It was believed that this purification process helped cleanse the spirit and allow the person to realign with the world around them. In the Navajo tradition, the sweat lodge was used for both physical and spiritual cleansing. It was common to seek guidance from the holy people during a sweat ceremony, asking for healing, wisdom, and strength. The experience was seen as one of spiritual rebirth. It was not just a physical process of sweat and detoxification, but a spiritual journey that allowed the person to release negative emotions, past trauma, and fears. When the individual emerged from the sweat lodge, they were not only cleansed physically but also renewed in spirit. The idea of spiritual purification is central to many indigenous healing practices. For example, in Southeast Asia, the indigenous peoples of Borneo used the concept of spiritual purification in their healing rituals, which combined both the physical aspects of medicinal plants with deep spiritual connection to their ancestors and the spirit world. They used a combination of herbal medicine, rituals, and spiritual guides to restore balance and harmony. In this belief system, illness was often seen as the result of a spiritual disturbance, whether it was a curse, a wrong action, or an imbalance caused by bad spirits. What makes the spiritual aspect of healing particularly fascinating is how it intersects with the healing properties of the plants and elements themselves. The plant medicines used by indigenous peoples weren't just physical tools to fight illness. They were seen as imbued with their own spirits. Ayahuasca, for example, wasn't just a healing brew, it was a sacred plant with its own consciousness, capable of guiding those who consumed it to spiritual insight. The relationship between the healer, the plant, and the spirit world was considered deeply sacred, with each plant having its own distinct power to heal. Interestingly, modern psychology and medicine are beginning to acknowledge the importance of spirituality in the healing process. The connection between mind, body, and spirit is becoming increasingly recognized in the treatment of chronic illnesses, mental health issues, and even cancer care. Holistic practices like mindfulness, meditation, and spiritual counseling are increasingly being incorporated into Western medicine as people recognize the profound impact of spiritual well-being on physical health. It's as if science is finally catching up to what indigenous cultures have known for millennia. Healing is not just about the body, but about aligning all aspects of the self. There's something incredibly profound about the indigenous belief that health and illness are connected to a person's spiritual state. It reminds us that modern medicine, for all its advances, can sometimes overlook the deeper layers of what it means to be truly well. Healing isn't just about treating a disease, it's about restoring balance, not just to the body, but to the spirit. This is a lesson that we can carry with us, integrating spiritual practices into our own lives and recognizing that true health comes from a deep, holistic understanding of ourselves and our relationship with the world around us. As we venture deeper into the incredible world of indigenous healing practices, it's essential to focus on a key aspect that has been essential for thousands of years: healing through community. While we often think of health as something personal, something to be managed by individuals, alone, indigenous healing practices taught us that health is deeply communal. In these communities, healing wasn't just the responsibility of one person, it was the responsibility of the whole group. Whether it was providing emotional support, helping with physical tasks, or participating in spiritual healing ceremonies, the community was at the core of the individual's recovery. Health was seen as a shared experience, and healing was a collective effort. Now, picture yourself within a close-knit indigenous community. The day starts early, and the whole village gathers together. You're not just a part of this group physically, you're connected spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. If someone falls ill, the entire community comes together. It's not just the healer or shaman who takes charge. Everyone has a role to play. Whether it's providing food, offering prayers, or simply sitting with the ill person to offer comfort, healing happens because the community is involved in the process. This deep sense of interconnectedness is something many modern healthcare systems have lost sight of. In these communities, healing was not viewed as an isolated process, but as a communal journey. Imagine a healing circle where the community gathers around an individual in need of care. They sit together, share stories, offer support, and engage in rituals or prayers. It's a space of safety, solidarity, and emotional release, where both the ill person and the community come together to restore balance. While the healer might guide the process, the collective energy of the group is what brings about true healing. The ill person isn't seen as separate from the community. They are still an active, integral part of the group, and their recovery is tied to the wellness of the entire community. One of the key components of these healing circles was the sharing of emotional burdens. In modern medicine, we often focus solely on the physical symptoms of an illness, and emotional support can sometimes feel like an afterthought. But in indigenous healing, emotional wellness was considered just as important as physical health. When a person fell ill, it wasn't just about diagnosing and treating the disease. It was about addressing the emotional and spiritual aspects of the person's experience. Many illnesses were believed to be manifestations of emotional or spiritual imbalance, and healing could only occur if the whole person, body, mind, and spirit, was cared for. In this context, the healing circle wasn't just a physical space. It was a space for emotional release, healing through words, and spiritual reconnection. The act of coming together in a healing circle was not only about the emotional benefit of being supported by others, it also reaffirmed the individual's place in the community. In a society where everyone plays a role, healing was a reminder that no one is alone. For indigenous peoples, the well-being of the individual was seen as deeply tied to the well-being of the group, and the recovery of the individual was celebrated by all. Even more fascinating is the role of communal rituals in this process. In many indigenous cultures, rituals and ceremonies were integral parts of the healing process. These rituals were not just for the individual, they were for the community as a whole. The communal nature of these rituals created a shared healing experience, where everyone participated, even if they were not directly involved in the person's treatment. Chanting, drumming, and dancing were often used to invite healing energy into the group, creating an atmosphere where the collective spirit of the community could guide the individual toward recovery. In the Native American traditions, for example, the sweat lodge ceremony is often conducted as a communal event. The sweat lodge is a small, enclosed structure where participants gather to sweat and cleanse themselves. While the heat and sweating provide physical benefits, the real power of the sweat lodge comes from the communal experience. The shared prayers, chants, and focused intention of the group create a collective energy that supports the individual's healing. The experience is about much more than just detoxifying the body. It's about reaffirming the connection to the land, to ancestors, and to the spiritual world. Purification in the sweat lodge is seen as both a physical and spiritual process. This concept of shared responsibility for health extends beyond the immediate circle of family and close friends. In many indigenous cultures, it is the entire community that plays a role in the well-being of its members. For instance, in the Inuit cultures of the Arctic, the community would come together to share food, care for the sick, and engage in collective spiritual practices to ensure the health of all members. Elders were highly revered for their wisdom and knowledge of the land, and they served not only as spiritual guides but also as emotional and physical caretakers for the community. They provided guidance, teaching, and support for the younger generation, ensuring that the traditional knowledge of healing was passed down. In these communities, it wasn't just about treating a person's illness. It was about addressing the whole ecosystem of their life. Diet, mental state, community involvement, and connection to nature were all seen as part of the healing process. The knowledge of natural remedies and healing rituals wasn't just something passed down through formal teachings. It was embedded in the daily interactions between people, their environment, and their spiritual beliefs. Community was not something that could be separated from healing. It was healing. Perhaps one of the most striking aspects of these communal healing practices is the emphasis on emotional healing. The idea that emotional well-being is just as important as physical health is one that modern healthcare systems are beginning to embrace. The rise of holistic health, integrative medicine, and mental health awareness all reflect a growing recognition that emotional, mental, and physical health are deeply interconnected. Indigenous healing traditions have understood this for millennia, and it's a lesson that we would do well to remember in our increasingly fragmented world. In modern healthcare, the tendency is often to treat the symptoms of illness in isolation, suppressing the pain, lowering the fever, and moving on. But in indigenous healing traditions, the approach was integrated and comprehensive, acknowledging that health doesn't come from a bottle of pills but from a balance of body, mind, spirit, and community. The power of shared healing lies not just in the comfort it provides but in the collective energy that reinforces the individual's sense of belonging and worth. Healing through community reminds us that no one is an island, and we all rely on one another for emotional, spiritual, and physical support. Now, let's take a step deeper into the profound role that tradition and ritual play in indigenous healing practices. While it may seem that traditional healers are simply experts in the physical use of plants, herbs, and other natural remedies, what often sets their practices apart is their rich spiritual and ritualistic foundations. These elements are integral to the process of healing and, more often than not, ritual is as essential as the medicinal plants used to cure ailments. In fact, the two are intertwined in a way that is central to the success of the healing process. Ritual, for indigenous peoples, is not a superfluous add-on. It is the vessel through which the medicine reaches its full potential, working not only to treat the body but also to heal the spirit and restore balance. Imagine, once again, that you are walking into a healer's sacred space, perhaps a small cabin or a ceremonial circle outdoors. You see the healer preparing for a ritual, gathering bundles of sacred herbs, lighting a fire, or preparing a potent brew. Everything that happens here, the chanting, the drumming, the waving of smoke, has purpose. It's not just about creating an atmosphere of healing, it's about entering a state of consciousness where the mind and body can connect on a deep, spiritual level. This space is where the energy of the plants meets the energy of the spirit, a blend that can only occur through ritual. In many indigenous cultures, healing begins long before any plant medicine is applied. It starts with creating the right environment, a space filled with positive energy, where the individual can relax and open up to the process. Chants and songs often accompany these rituals. Music and sound have long been believed to have a profound effect on the body and spirit. Many healing traditions involve drums or rattles, which create rhythmic patterns thought to align with the heartbeat or the natural rhythms of the body. The sound of the drum, for example, isn't merely for auditory pleasure. It's believed to bring about a deep sense of connection between the individual and the world around them. The ritualistic use of sound in these ceremonies also serves to focus the mind, enabling the healer and the patient to connect with deeper realms of consciousness, to communicate with ancestors, and to invite spiritual intervention. These spiritual practices are key to the mental and emotional components of healing. One cannot ignore the profound impact that emotional and psychological states have on physical health. In fact, many indigenous cultures do not separate the mind, body, and spirit. They see them as one interconnected system. To heal the body, one must heal the spirit and vice versa. Thus, ritual is a form of spiritual medicine that prepares the person not only physically but emotionally and spiritually for the healing process. The ceremony may involve a personal confession, an offering to the spirits, or a prayer for guidance, each element allowing the person to open up, release negative emotions, and restore harmony to their being. Consider, for example, the role of sweat lodges in various indigenous cultures, especially among Native American tribes. The sweat lodge ceremony is a holistic ritual that combines both physical and spiritual healing. It's a space where participants sweat out toxins and cleanse their bodies while simultaneously engaging in spiritual and emotional purification. The process is long and intense, with a series of hot stones placed in the center of the lodge, creating a sauna-like atmosphere. The heat causes the body to sweat, but it also triggers a state of intense reflection and meditation. Participants chant and pray, and their bodies begin to release emotional and spiritual toxins, just as they release physical toxins through sweat. This purification process is intended to align the participants' energies with the natural world, allowing them to shed emotional baggage, negativity, and internal conflicts. Some participants report feeling spiritually reborn after the ceremony, as if their minds and spirits have been cleansed along with their bodies. For many, the sweat lodge is not just about physical detoxification but about reconnecting with the spiritual realm, seeking guidance from the ancestors, and gaining insight into their personal lives. Rituals such as these are designed not just to heal the body but to open up spiritual channels that allow for the infusion of healing energy. For the person receiving treatment, the ritual provides the space and structure needed to receive that energy. In essence, the ritual creates a sacred container, a safe, energetic space where the person can allow healing to take place on all levels. Many indigenous cultures use sacred plants as part of their spiritual healing rituals. These plants, like ayahuasca, peyote, or tobacco, are considered spiritual allies. They are not simply tools to treat physical ailments. They are seen as sentient beings with unique powers that connect the individual to the spirit world. Indigenous healers believe that these plants can communicate with the individual, offering guidance and insight, and facilitating deep emotional and spiritual healing. For example, in South America, the ayahuasca ceremony is often led by a shaman who acts as an intermediary between the physical and spirit worlds. The healer uses the plant's psychoactive properties to enter altered states of consciousness and guide the participants through a journey of spiritual discovery and healing. People who undergo these ceremonies often report experiencing visions that provide insights into their health, their relationships, and their life's purpose. This is not just a matter of drug-induced hallucination. The plants are thought to open the person to a spiritual realm where healing can occur on a deep, transformative level. In contrast, the peyote ceremonies conducted by indigenous groups like the Huichol or Navajo involve another sacred plant used for similar spiritual purposes. Peyote is known for its hallucinogenic properties, but its use is not for recreation. It's a tool for spiritual awakening and healing. The journey through a peyote ceremony is considered sacred and involves intense reflection, self-exploration, and deep spiritual insight. The peyote itself is a spiritual guide, opening the participant to visions that allow them to confront inner conflicts, process trauma, and achieve clarity on the emotional or physical issue at hand. Ritual and ceremony also serve as a powerful tool for community healing. In many indigenous cultures, when a person falls ill, it's not just the individual who is affected, the entire community feels the ripple effects. Healing, therefore, becomes a communal event. Healing ceremonies, prayer circles, and collective rituals allow the whole group to support the individual in the process of recovery. The belief is that a group's energy can aid in the healing of the sick person. The whole tribe or community comes together to restore balance, not just to the individual, but to the larger web of life that the individual is a part of. Consider the healing circles of the Lakota Sioux or the Dean people. These circles are gatherings where people come together to pray, share, and support one another. They create an open space for healing, both physical and emotional. This collective approach to healing is rooted in the belief that the community's well-being is inextricably linked to that of the individual. In a healing circle, everyone plays a role, whether it's offering prayers, listening, or providing physical support. This communal healing process reinforces the spiritual unity of the group. The individual's illness is not seen as an isolated event, but as something that affects the entire community. Healing is a shared responsibility, and in this way, it becomes a communal journey of restoring balance. In many indigenous traditions, this process extends beyond the human community to include the land, animals, and spirits. Everything is connected in a web of life. Healing doesn't just occur within the body, it involves the entire environment, and the rituals performed during these ceremonies are aimed at restoring harmony to the entire system. What's fascinating is that modern science is starting to recognize the profound impact of community support on health outcomes. Studies consistently show that individuals who have strong social support systems tend to recover more quickly from illness, experience less chronic pain, and even live longer lives. The energy of community, the love, support, and care shared, has a tangible effect on health. This is something indigenous cultures have understood for millennia, that the body is never isolated from the community. Healing doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It happens when we come together to support each other. Let's step into the world of sweat lodges and saunas, a tradition that blends both purification and healing, where the air is thick with warmth, and every breath feels like a cleansing ritual for the body and spirit. Picture yourself entering a dimly lit structure, built from stone or clay, its walls radiating heat from the fire within. The smell of burning wood and herbs fills your nostrils, while the humidity in the air wraps around you like a heavy blanket. As the temperature rises, so does the tension in your muscles, but with each drop of sweat, you begin to feel lighter, calmer, and more connected to the world around you. This ritual, practiced by various indigenous tribes, including those of North America, was no ordinary physical cleanse. It was an immersive experience that combined both spiritual and physical wellness. For many tribes, the sweat lodge was considered one of the most sacred healing practices. It wasn't just a place to sweat out toxins, but a place to expel negative energy, confront inner struggles, and restore balance between body, mind, and spirit. The ceremony was a communal event that bound participants together, not only in the shared discomfort of the heat but also in their collective pursuit of healing and renewal. In these sweat lodges, the intense heat served as a catalyst for detoxification. But it wasn't just about sweating out impurities, it was also about purging emotional and spiritual toxins. The heat would open the pores of the body, allowing sweat to carry away physical impurities. At the same time, the ceremony provided an environment for deep introspection, allowing people to reflect on their emotions, confront inner fears, or seek spiritual guidance. The healing process wasn't just about curing ailments. It was a holistic approach to balance the energies within a person and between that person and the natural world. During the ceremony, a healer or spiritual leader would typically guide participants through the ritual. The atmosphere was often heavy with the scent of sacred herbs like sage, cedar, or sweetgrass. The smoke from these herbs was thought to purify the air, cleanse the mind, and drive away negative spirits. The use of herbal smoke added another layer of spiritual and physical purification, heightening the effects of the ceremony. It's as though each breath of smoke worked in harmony with the heat to cleanse not just the body but the soul itself. In many cases, the sweat lodge was more than just a solo experience. It was a community event. Family members, friends, and even entire tribes would gather together in the sweat lodge, sharing in the heat and the healing process. In these communal sweat lodges, people would support one another, providing comfort during the intense heat and offering encouragement during the emotional release that often accompanied the ceremony. The experience of sweating it out together helped to foster a sense of unity, strengthening both the individual and the collective spirit of the tribe. But the sweat lodge wasn't simply a practice of enduring heat. It was designed to be a place of emotional release. As the heat built up, many participants would begin to feel overwhelmed, and that was when the emotional purging would occur. Whether it was shedding tears of grief, letting go of old fears, or simply expressing frustrations, the sweat lodge ceremony encouraged people to confront their emotions in a safe space. It wasn't uncommon for people to enter the sweat lodge feeling weighed down by negative emotions or unresolved conflicts, only to leave feeling lighter, freer, and more connected to their sense of self. Historians still debate whether the primary purpose of sweat lodge ceremonies was purely physical or deeply spiritual. Some argue that the heat itself, combined with the herbal treatments, was the key to its healing properties. Others suggest that the true power of the sweat lodge lay in its spiritual significance, acting as a way to purify the soul and release emotional burdens. While we may never know for sure, it's likely that the true healing came from the interplay of both physical and spiritual elements. The sweat lodge ceremony taught that the body and spirit were not separate entities, but deeply intertwined. Healing the body required healing the spirit and vice versa. Interestingly, many of the practices in the sweat lodge ceremony mirror those in modern wellness trends. From the rise of saunas to the popularity of meditation and emotional cleansing, there's a growing recognition of the mind-body connection that indigenous tribes understood long before it became a trend. The use of heat for detoxification, the importance of ritual, and the power of communal healing are all ideas that have found their way into today's world of self-care and wellness practices. But what sets the indigenous sweat lodge apart is its deep spiritual and cultural significance. This was not a spa day, but a sacred ritual that restored balance and harmony in the individual and the community. The tradition of sweat lodges didn't just vanish with the advent of modern medicine. In fact, many tribes continue to practice the sweat lodge ceremony today, holding on to the knowledge passed down through generations. These ceremonies continue to serve as a way to connect with their ancestors, to heal, and to remind themselves of their deep connection to the earth. While the specifics of the ritual may vary from tribe to tribe, the core of the practice remains the same, a powerful, communal experience of physical and spiritual purification. Historians and anthropologists continue to study the sweat lodge and its various forms, but what is clear is that this ritual is more than just a historical curiosity. It is a living tradition, one that still holds significance for those who practice it today. Whether you're considering the sweat lodge from a historical perspective or as a modern-day practice, it remains a testament to the holistic approach to healing that indigenous tribes have long understood. The heat, the smoke, the silence, the shared experience, each part of the ritual is designed to work together to restore balance, both to the body and to the spirit. Now that we've explored the transformative power of heat, let's shift our focus to another equally vital element in indigenous healing, water. Water was, and still is, considered not only a physical necessity but a sacred force, an element with the power to purify, cleanse, and restore balance. For many indigenous tribes, water was seen as a living entity, imbued with spiritual power and connected to the cycle of life itself. Far more than a simple resource, water was the vessel through which healing occurred, whether it was through drinking, bathing, or even in the context of ritual. Imagine the serene flow of a river, the sound of water gently trickling over stones, the coolness of it lapping at your feet as you step into its embrace. For countless indigenous peoples, rivers, lakes, and springs were seen as places of purification. Whether it was a sacred spring or a secluded riverbank, the water was thought to carry with it healing properties that could restore the body's vitality and calm the spirit. The relationship between water and healing wasn't just physical, there was a deeply spiritual dimension to it as well. In many indigenous cultures, water wasn't merely something to drink or bathe in, it was a source of life, health, and spiritual renewal. For example, the Navajo people of the American Southwest believed that water had the ability to cleanse both the body and the soul. The water that flowed from sacred springs was often used in ceremonies to purify the community, as it was seen as the very lifeblood of the earth. This wasn't just about washing away dirt, it was about washing away negativity, emotional baggage, and spiritual impurities. To the Navajo, water was a connection to the divine, to the ancestors, and to the land itself. In the Amazon rainforest, water also played a pivotal role in health and healing practices. The vast rivers that wound their way through the jungle were considered sacred, and the people who lived along them believed that the waters could heal a wide variety of ailments. Indigenous healers would sometimes immerse their patients in the waters of these rivers, not only for physical relief but also for spiritual renewal. Some tribes believed that the water itself was alive, imbued with spirit and energy that could aid in the healing process. Water was a way to connect to the flow of life, a way to restore balance to the body and mind. Water's role in indigenous healing was not limited to rivers and lakes. Many cultures also used it in more direct medicinal applications. For instance, the use of steam baths, similar to the sweat lodge rituals, was a common practice in many indigenous tribes, especially in the Pacific Northwest and parts of Central America. The steam was used to open the pores, cleanse the body, and encourage sweating, but it also had a spiritual component. The steam itself was believed to carry away negative energy, purify the spirit, and promote overall well-being. Perhaps one of the most interesting aspects of water in indigenous healing is how it was often used in tandem with other elements of nature. The combination of water with herbs, mud, and other natural substances created powerful healing concoctions. In some cases, water was used to brew healing teas or infusions from plants like willow bark or mint. In others, water would be mixed with mud and applied as a soothing poultice to treat skin ailments or wounds. These holistic treatments were designed to work in tandem with the natural world, combining the healing properties of water with the medicinal benefits of plants and other natural resources. Historians still debate whether the belief in the healing powers of water was purely symbolic or whether the physical properties of water itself contributed to the healing process. While it's true that water can be incredibly soothing and beneficial to the body in many ways, especially when used in combination with heat or herbal remedies, there's also something deeply symbolic about water as a purifying, life-giving force. It's possible that the dual nature of water's role in healing, both physical and spiritual, was what made it so powerful. It wasn't just the water itself, but the belief in its power to heal that made the process so effective. In many ways, the reverence for water in indigenous healing practices reminds us of the importance of connecting with the natural world. In our modern, fast-paced lives, we often take water for granted, seeing it as simply a resource to drink or bathe in. But for indigenous peoples, water was a living, breathing entity, a source of both physical health and spiritual well-being. This deep respect for water and for the natural world as a whole is something we could all benefit from reconnecting with today. As we continue this journey through the rich traditions of indigenous medicine, it's clear that water, whether consumed, bathed in, or used in ritual, was more than just a tool for survival. It was a powerful agent of healing, a spiritual force that brought people closer to the earth, to their ancestors, and to their true selves. The next time you take a drink of water or dip your toes into a river, remember that, for many cultures, water was not only life, it was medicine. As we continue our exploration of indigenous healing practices, let's take a closer look at some of the more unexpected yet deeply effective remedies, the bark and roots that have been harvested from trees and plants for centuries. Picture yourself walking through a forest, where every tree, plant, and shrub offers a potential cure. To many indigenous peoples, the forest wasn't just a backdrop to their lives. It was a living pharmacy, full of remedies for every ailment. These natural healers, which may seem simple to the untrained eye, had extraordinary properties that have been passed down through generations. The bark of trees is one of nature's hidden gems, often overlooked but used for thousands of years to treat everything from fevers to wounds. The bark of the willow tree, for example, is known to contain salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. Long before Western medicine discovered this compound, indigenous peoples in Europe, Asia, and the Americas had been using willow bark to ease pain, reduce inflammation, and lower fever. This simple remedy, derived from the very trees that dotted the landscape, helped countless people find relief from everyday ailments. But willow bark was just one example of the many trees that offered their bark for medicinal purposes. In North America, the inner bark of the white pine was used as a remedy for colds and coughs. It was brewed into a tea or boiled to extract its healing properties, helping to clear respiratory issues and ease sore throats. Similarly, The bark of the birch tree was used by several indigenous tribes for its anti-inflammatory and antiseptic qualities, often applied to wounds or used to treat infections. What might seem like a simple tree bark was, in fact, a powerful medicine that helped people heal naturally. Roots, too, were an invaluable resource in the indigenous medicine chest. For example, the root of the echinacea plant, often associated with modern herbal remedies, was used by indigenous tribes across North America to boost the immune system and treat colds. In some cultures, the root was even chewed directly to relieve pain and infection. Echinacea's reputation as an immune booster is well known today, but its use as a healing agent dates back centuries, long before it became a staple in modern herbal medicine. Another fascinating example of the power of roots comes from the use of ginseng. Native to North America and Asia, ginseng was used by indigenous peoples to promote vitality and improve overall health. The root was highly prized for its ability to boost energy, treat fatigue, and enhance physical endurance. Even today, ginseng remains one of the most popular herbal remedies worldwide, and its use in indigenous medicine was the precursor to its global recognition. Historians still argue whether the use of tree bark and roots in indigenous medicine was based purely on observation and trial and error, or whether there was a deeper understanding of the properties of these plants. While modern science has confirmed many of the medicinal properties of these plants, it's clear that indigenous peoples had an intimate relationship with their environment, observing how each plant and tree responded to different ailments. This knowledge wasn't something that could be written down in books. It was passed down through generations, from elder to younger, in a living tradition of healing. What is truly remarkable is how these remedies were used not only for their medicinal properties but also as part of a greater spiritual understanding of health. Many tribes believed that the plants themselves had spirits or energies that contributed to their healing power. The act of harvesting bark or roots wasn't simply a physical action. It was a sacred ritual, one that honored the life and energy of the plant. When a healer gathered bark or roots, it was done with reverence, acknowledging the sacrifice of the plant and giving thanks for its healing properties. In this way, medicine was deeply intertwined with spirituality, where the harvest was not just for survival but a sacred act of reciprocity. The use of bark and roots also had an element of sustainability built into it. These plants were not harvested indiscriminately but were carefully chosen and harvested at the right time of year, when their healing properties were at their peak. This ensured that the plants could regenerate, maintaining a balance between human need and environmental preservation. Indigenous knowledge of sustainable harvesting practices helped protect the ecosystem, allowing these medicinal plants to thrive for generations. Historians and ethnobotanists still debate the exact methods indigenous peoples used to identify and categorize plants for medicinal use. Was it purely trial and error, or did they have an intrinsic understanding of the plant's properties? What's clear is that their knowledge was far more sophisticated than we often give them credit for. They didn't just stumble upon these remedies. They had a deep, experiential understanding of the natural world, one that was cultivated over centuries of careful observation and interaction with the environment. As we reflect on the incredible healing potential of bark and roots, we realize that modern medicine owes much of its origins to these ancient traditions. Many of the drugs we rely on today, from aspirin to antibiotics, have their roots in these ancient plant medicines. The discovery of these compounds in the wild was a result of careful, patient observation, an art that indigenous peoples mastered long before modern science. As we continue our exploration of indigenous healing traditions, we now turn our attention to a practice that's perhaps less well known but equally important: the healing powers of sound and vibration. While many of us think of medicine as something that comes in the form of a pill or potion, for indigenous tribes, the sounds of the world were just as vital to their health and well-being. The idea that sound can have a therapeutic effect isn't new. It's something that has been practiced for thousands of years across cultures. In fact, many modern healing practices, such as sound therapy and vibrational medicine, are simply rediscovering what indigenous cultures have known all along. Imagine yourself sitting in a quiet, sacred space. The air is still, and the only sound you hear is the deep rhythmic beat of a drum. The pulse of the drum seems to resonate with the very heartbeat of the earth itself, filling the space with an energy that feels both grounding and uplifting. In many indigenous cultures, drums and other instruments were not simply used for ceremonial purposes, they were an integral part of the healing process. The vibrations from the drum, the chanting, the rattling of sticks, all of these sounds were believed to have a direct impact on the body and the spirit. For example, many Native American tribes used drums to facilitate healing rituals. The steady rhythm of the drum was thought to mimic the natural rhythms of the body, specifically, the heartbeat. This connection between the drum and the body's natural rhythms was believed to help restore balance and harmony within the individual. The sound of the drum wasn't just about creating music, it was about creating a healing vibration that resonated with the body, helping to align energy and promote physical and emotional well-being. Chanting, too, played a vital role in many indigenous healing practices. In some cultures, chants were used to invoke healing spirits or ancestors, asking for their assistance in the recovery of the sick. The power of the chant came not just from the words, but from the vibrations created by the sound itself. When sung or spoken in a rhythmic, repetitive manner, these chants were believed to create an energetic shift that could heal both the body and the spirit. Historians still argue whether the power of these healing sounds lies in the physical vibrations or in the cultural and psychological belief that the sounds themselves have the power to heal. Some researchers suggest that the vibrations from drums, rattles, and chants could trigger physiological changes in the body, such as lowering blood pressure or inducing a meditative state. Others believe that the true power of these practices lies in the belief and intention behind the sound. In either case, the therapeutic effect of sound is clear, and it remains a powerful tool for healing in many indigenous traditions. Interestingly, modern science is beginning to validate what indigenous cultures have known for centuries. Research on sound therapy has shown that certain frequencies can have a positive effect on the body, helping to reduce stress, alleviate pain, and promote healing. The practice of using sound to restore balance and promote well-being is something that has been gaining traction in the wellness community in recent years, with practices like sound baths and tuning forks becoming increasingly popular. In many ways, the indigenous use of sound for healing wasn't just about the physical effects. It was about the deep connection to the natural world. The drum, the rattle, the voice, these weren't just instruments. They were extensions of the environment, tuned to the rhythms of the earth, the sky, and the human body. For indigenous peoples, healing was never just about the individual. It was about restoring harmony between the person, the community, and the world around them. Some tribes also incorporated the use of sacred flutes and other wind instruments into their healing rituals. These instruments were believed to carry spiritual energy, with their melodic tones helping to align the spirit and the body. The sound of the flute, in particular, was thought to be especially effective in calming the mind and encouraging emotional release, allowing the individual to confront and let go of negative emotions that may have contributed to illness. As we look at these practices through the lens of modern wellness trends, it's clear that sound therapy is having a resurgence in today's world. People are rediscovering the power of vibration, from the calming effects of singing bowls to the restorative benefits of nature sounds. What's particularly fascinating is how these practices, so deeply embedded in indigenous healing traditions, are now being explored by Western medicine as a valid form of treatment. It's a beautiful reminder that these ancient practices were not mere superstition or primitive rituals, but rather complex, holistic systems of healing that worked in harmony with the body's natural rhythms. Historians and anthropologists continue to study the role of sound in indigenous healing, and while we may never fully understand the deeper spiritual significance of these practices, one thing is certain: sound is a potent tool for healing. Whether through the steady pulse of a drum, the soothing melody of a flute, or the deep resonance of a chant, the therapeutic use of sound has proven time and again that it holds the power to restore balance, promote wellness, and connect us to something greater than ourselves. As we delve deeper into the holistic world of indigenous healing practices, let's explore the fascinating intersection between ancient medicine and modern science. In many ways, the world of indigenous medicine and the practices it encompasses were ahead of their time. Today, as modern science advances, we are beginning to rediscover and validate many of the techniques and remedies used by indigenous peoples for centuries. This intersection of ancient wisdom and contemporary research is not only a testament to the efficacy of these healing practices but also a reminder of how much knowledge we have lost in the rush toward technological advancement. Indigenous medicine was holistic, meaning it didn't focus solely on the physical body but also on the emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being of an individual. This is where it aligns with modern approaches to health, like integrative medicine, which looks at the whole person rather than just treating symptoms. Many modern researchers are now turning to traditional practices for inspiration, recognizing that the mind-body connection is far more powerful than we once believed. In fact, some of the most exciting breakthroughs in modern medicine have come from studying plants, herbs, and other natural remedies that indigenous peoples have used for centuries. Take the example of the humble willow bark. While modern medicine only caught up to the healing potential of this plant a few centuries ago, indigenous peoples in both North America and Europe were using willow bark for its pain-relieving properties long before we ever discovered its connection to aspirin. Willow bark contains salicylic acid, which is the active ingredient in aspirin, a medication many of us take for pain relief. Indigenous healers understood the importance of this plant, not just because of its effectiveness but also because they knew how to use it responsibly without over-harvesting or causing harm to the environment. This knowledge wasn't written down in textbooks. It was passed down orally from one generation to the next, with an understanding of the balance between use and sustainability. Another fascinating example is the use of echinacea by indigenous tribes of North America. Today, it's one of the most commonly used herbs for boosting the immune system and preventing colds. Yet, its healing properties were well known long before modern herbalists or scientists acknowledged it. Indigenous people would use the roots of echinacea for everything from treating snake bites to preventing infections. They would prepare it in teas, poultices, or tinctures. Today, modern research is exploring its role in immune system enhancement, and while scientists are still trying to fully understand the mechanisms at play, there's no doubt that the plant's healing properties were understood long ago. Historians still argue whether the use of these plants in traditional healing was more about intuition and trial and error, or whether it reflected an inherent, sophisticated knowledge of biochemistry and medicinal properties. Regardless, what is undeniable is that indigenous knowledge of plants and healing was built on centuries of observation, testing, and experience, passed down through stories, rituals, and hands-on learning. And it was more than just a matter of convenience. These plants were revered as sacred gifts from the earth, and their uses were deeply woven into the cultural fabric of the communities that employed them. Interestingly, modern science is now discovering what indigenous healers knew all along. For instance, turmeric, a plant widely used in Ayurvedic medicine, has anti-inflammatory properties and has gained significant attention in the West. Indigenous peoples in India and Southeast Asia were using turmeric for centuries, not just for culinary purposes but also for its medicinal benefits. It wasn't just about treating a wound or an infection, it was about aligning with nature's rhythms, understanding what was needed at any given moment, and working with the land rather than exploiting it. In the Amazon rainforest, ayahuasca is another example of a plant medicine that modern science has been scrutinizing. Used in spiritual and healing rituals for centuries, ayahuasca has gained popularity in the West for its psychoactive properties and its potential to treat mental health disorders. While the modern scientific community continues to debate its effectiveness, indigenous people have been using it as a way to access deeper realms of consciousness, facilitate healing, and connect with the spiritual world. The practice involves a complex blend of Banisteriopsis caapi, a vine containing Harmala alkaloids, and Psychotria viridis, a plant with DMT. When prepared properly, these plants induce a powerful visionary experience that many claim has transformative, healing properties. It is fascinating to see how the Western world is beginning to acknowledge the potential of such traditional healing methods, though they still struggle to understand the full scope of what is happening during these experiences. But indigenous healing practices aren't limited to plant medicine alone. They also encompassed a deep understanding of the human body and how it relates to the natural environment. Many indigenous groups had highly developed concepts of nutrition, exercise, and bodywork long before modern medicine began to fully explore these areas. Take, for instance, the massage therapy used by indigenous peoples in North and South America. These techniques were not just meant for relaxation, they were intended to stimulate energy flow, release toxins, and promote the natural healing processes of the body. Today, shiatsu and other forms of therapeutic massage have become well known, but they are not new ideas. They have their roots in ancient indigenous practices. By using the hands, elbows, and sometimes even heated stones, practitioners would work on pressure points, stimulate blood circulation, and bring balance to the body's energy. This was not just a physical healing process, but a deeply spiritual one as well, as it restored harmony between the body and spirit. In many indigenous cultures, physical health was inseparable from emotional and spiritual well-being. The use of healing circles, where members of the community would come together to support one another in times of illness or emotional distress, was a cornerstone of traditional healing practices. These healing circles were not just about physical care but about creating an environment where people could share their struggles, receive emotional support, and feel a sense of connection to their tribe. This communal aspect of healing, where the entire community plays a role in the recovery of the individual, is something that modern medicine often overlooks. Historians still argue whether these holistic methods of healing were unique to indigenous cultures or if they were universal to early human societies. What is clear, however, is that these methods were incredibly effective for the communities that practiced them. They didn't rely on pills or prescriptions. They relied on deep knowledge of the land, the human body, and the spirit. The scientific community is now beginning to recognize the value of these holistic practices. Many researchers are studying the role of community, emotional support, and mental well-being in physical health, areas that indigenous cultures have always understood as interconnected. The rise of integrative medicine, which combines Western medical practices with alternative therapies like acupuncture, herbalism, and massage, is a direct reflection of this growing understanding. In this way, modern medicine is starting to bridge the gap with indigenous healing practices, acknowledging that health is not just about the absence of disease but about achieving balance across all aspects of life. However, there's still a long way to go. Many indigenous healing practices remain misunderstood or dismissed by the mainstream medical community. Yet, as science advances and we learn more about the interconnectedness of the body, mind, and spirit, it's becoming increasingly clear that we can no longer ignore the wisdom of these ancient traditions. What's remarkable is that many of these traditional practices continue to be used today. In some communities, the knowledge of plant medicine, massage, and healing rituals is still passed down from elder to younger, ensuring that the wisdom of the past is preserved for future generations. These practices remind us that we are not separate from the natural world, but an integral part of it. The land provides us with everything we need, not just for survival, but for thriving. And by reconnecting with nature and embracing these ancient healing traditions, we can find ways to heal in a more holistic, balanced way. Let's now turn our focus to one of the most mysterious and compelling aspects of indigenous healing, the rediscovery of lost remedies. These remedies, which were once part of daily life for indigenous peoples, remain largely underappreciated by the modern world, often buried deep within the dense forests, jungles, or mountains. Despite the continued march of modern medicine, these remedies possess incredible healing potential, and many are still being uncovered by scientists, herbalists, and wellness practitioners today. These plants and herbs, once treated as common knowledge, have the potential to transform how we approach wellness, if we're willing to listen and learn from the past. Imagine walking through an untouched rainforest, the air thick with moisture and the scent of fertile soil. You pass by seemingly ordinary plants, vines, shrubs, flowers, but each one holds secrets, some of which modern science is only beginning to uncover. For example, the ayahuasca vine, which is so often discussed in relation to its psychedelic effects, is part of an extensive medicinal tradition in the Amazon rainforest. Though its psychoactive properties are well known, its medicinal uses go beyond mere spiritual experiences. The Banisteriopsis caapi vine and its partner plant, Psychotria viridis, have been used for centuries to treat a variety of ailments, including anxiety, depression, and pain. This ancient brew has recently made its way into the modern wellness sphere, but its full medicinal value is still being explored. While modern researchers and therapists have begun to validate its potential to treat psychological and emotional disorders, it is truly fascinating to think about how long this knowledge had been passed down orally through generations in remote villages, long before Western medicine even had a word for the ailments it could treat. Historically, indigenous peoples didn't just rely on the mystical and spiritual effects of plants like ayahuasca. They were highly attuned to the scientific properties of plants, many of which were being used long before the advent of modern pharmaceuticals. In fact, many of the plants indigenous cultures used for medicine are now staples in modern health practices, though often without crediting their original sources. The coca plant, for example, has long been known by the indigenous peoples of the Andes for its energizing properties. While it is now associated with the creation of illegal substances, the plant itself is a source of natural relief for fatigue, altitude sickness, and hunger. Indigenous people would chew the leaves to provide energy for long treks through the mountains or to cope with the extreme conditions of high altitudes. Now, with the advent of modern pharmaceuticals, coca is often overshadowed by the negative associations of its processed form. Still, the pure, raw plant continues to be an important part of the cultural and medicinal practices of the Andean people. Another fascinating plant, used by indigenous cultures in the Arctic regions, is fireweed. This plant, which thrives in harsh environments, has properties that have been utilized for centuries. The leaves and flowers of fireweed were often brewed into teas that helped with everything from colds and fevers to gastrointestinal issues. Its leaves were also used as poultices for sore muscles or skin ailments. The modern scientific world is just now beginning to explore fireweed's antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties, but the indigenous people of the Arctic were using it intuitively, deeply embedded in their cultural practices as both a remedy and a preventative measure. Even the less celebrated and humble plants have incredible healing powers. Take stinging nettle, once regarded as an irritating weed. Indigenous people from around the world have long used nettle to treat a range of issues, from arthritis to allergies. The leaves, when properly handled, are brewed into tea, which acts as an anti-inflammatory and diuretic. The modern world has only recently discovered the power of nettle, but for indigenous peoples, nettle was a known and respected medicine. The leaves and roots were often used to ease joint pain, reduce swelling, and cleanse the body of excess fluid. Interestingly, modern research is beginning to validate these ancient uses, with studies showing that nettle can help with conditions such as arthritis and benign prostatic hyperplasia. Many of these plants, despite their clear medicinal value, have been lost in the shuffle of modern development and pharmaceutical industries. Deforestation, urbanization, and the encroachment of agriculture have led to the destruction of ecosystems where these plants grow. The very landscapes that once provided this wealth of knowledge are disappearing, taking with them valuable sources of medicine that we may never fully understand. There are countless species of plants and herbs in the rainforests of Central America, Africa, and Southeast Asia that have yet to be explored by modern researchers. We may never know what cures these forests are holding. What we do know is that many indigenous communities continue to fight for the protection of their traditional lands, not just for the preservation of their way of life, but to protect the deep reservoir of knowledge they hold. One of the most poignant aspects of this process is the idea of sustainable harvest. Indigenous healers understood the importance of maintaining a balance between using the land's resources and allowing the earth to regenerate. This concept of sustainability was central to their healing practices, and it's a practice that modern society is only beginning to appreciate. Today, as demand for natural medicine increases, the concept of sustainability is more important than ever. Harvesting plants responsibly, ensuring they are grown in harmony with nature, and protecting the ecosystems they come from are practices that need to be integrated into modern agriculture and medicine. Perhaps the most profound lesson we can learn from indigenous knowledge of plants and healing is the principle of balance. Indigenous peoples understood that health was not just the absence of disease, but the harmonious alignment of body, mind, and spirit. For them, healing was a deeply spiritual practice, not simply a physical cure. The plants, animals, and resources they relied upon were seen as part of a greater whole, connected through a web of life that extended far beyond the individual. Whether it was through a ritual, a herbal remedy, or an act of community support, health was about restoring balance within the body, the community, and the natural world. In modern times, we're beginning to recognize this holistic approach again, especially in the rise of complementary and alternative medicine. Practices such as aromatherapy, acupuncture, and herbal medicine have been gaining traction as people seek ways to feel more connected to their health and environment. While these practices might seem like a return to ancient ways, they are actually a rediscovery of wisdom that has existed for thousands of years. They allow us to reconnect with nature and rediscover the healing power of plants and rituals that have been sidelined by conventional medicine for too long. We're at a point where collaboration between modern science and indigenous knowledge is becoming increasingly important. Research into plants like ginseng, turmeric, and echinacea is uncovering new uses and confirming what indigenous healers have known for generations. The challenge now is how we can work together, honoring the knowledge of indigenous peoples while bringing it into the modern context in a sustainable way. The loss of biodiversity and the rapid pace of environmental destruction present significant barriers to this kind of collaboration, but it also underscores the urgency of preserving these traditional practices. Historians and scientists still debate whether all the medicinal knowledge of indigenous cultures can truly be captured or replicated. Can we truly understand their relationship with the land and their intuitive knowledge of plants? Or is there something deeply spiritual and experiential about their practices that modern science can never fully grasp? What's clear, however, is that the traditional knowledge of plants and healing, passed down through generations, is incredibly valuable. It's a treasure trove of natural wisdom, one that modern society is just beginning to explore. As we face global health challenges, the lessons from indigenous healing practices, emphasizing balance, sustainability, and the deep connection to nature, are more relevant than ever. The plants, rituals, and practices that were once dismissed or forgotten are now being recognized as vital sources of health and wellness, and it's time we listen more carefully to the wisdom of the earth that indigenous cultures have been living by for centuries. Continuing our journey into the realm of indigenous healing, we now turn our focus to the role of community in the healing process. While many modern medical practices focus on the individual, treating one patient at a time, indigenous healing traditions emphasize the role of the community in supporting and fostering health. In these communities, health was seen as a collective responsibility, and healing was often a group effort. From the moment someone fell ill to their eventual recovery, the entire community played a crucial part in the process. This communal approach to wellness highlights an aspect of healing that is often overlooked in modern medicine: the healing power of human connection and support. Imagine living in a small indigenous village where the community is tightly knit and every person's well-being is important to everyone else. When someone falls ill, the response isn't just medical, it's also emotional, spiritual, and communal. The healing process begins with family, friends, and elders coming together to support the individual, whether that support is in the form of practical help, emotional comfort, or spiritual guidance. In this context, the healing process isn't just about treating the body, it's about caring for the person as a whole, which includes their relationships, their emotional state, and their sense of belonging within the community. One of the most notable aspects of this communal healing is the role of healing circles. Healing circles, which are still used by some indigenous communities today, are collective gatherings where people come together to support someone who is ill. These circles are a space for open sharing, where the person in need of healing is surrounded by family, friends, and sometimes even members of the wider community. The idea is that healing comes not just from the physical remedies or rituals, but from the collective energy and support of the group. The power of this communal energy is thought to help restore balance and promote recovery. In many indigenous cultures, healing circles are not just about physical health. They also address the emotional and spiritual aspects of healing. In these circles, participants might share their feelings, offer prayers or words of encouragement, and help the person who is ill feel loved and supported. The act of coming together in this way creates a safe space where the individual can process their emotions, confront their fears, and feel reassured by the presence of their community. This is an approach that modern medicine is only now starting to appreciate. The emotional and psychological support provided by a strong, caring community can have a profound impact on physical health. The concept of community-centered healing is also deeply embedded in the idea of shared responsibility. In indigenous cultures, the well-being of one person is seen as a reflection of the well-being of the community as a whole. When someone is sick, it's not just their problem, it's everyone's. This shared responsibility means that the community works together to ensure the individual's healing process is supported in every way possible. Whether it's through providing food, assisting with daily tasks, or offering emotional support, the collective effort is an essential part of the healing journey. This contrasts with the modern approach of individualized care, where often the burden of recovery is placed solely on the patient. In many cases, this communal approach extends beyond the immediate family or village. Some indigenous healing practices involve larger tribal or cultural groups coming together to support someone who is sick. These healing ceremonies often involve the whole community participating in ritual, song, dance, or prayer, all of which are believed to contribute to the person's healing. The idea is that the energy of the entire group can be channeled toward the sick person, promoting healing not just on a physical level, but also on an emotional and spiritual one. The importance of community in the healing process is also reflected in the practice of shared knowledge. In many indigenous communities, elders are the keepers of healing knowledge. They pass down their wisdom about medicinal plants, rituals, and spiritual practices to younger generations. This tradition of shared knowledge ensures that the healing practices of the community are preserved and passed down through time. It also reinforces the idea that healing is not an individual endeavor, but a collective one. Everyone has a role to play, whether it's as a healer, a helper, or a supporter. Interestingly, modern research is now beginning to explore the scientific benefits of this communal approach to healing. Studies have shown that social support plays a crucial role in recovery, and the emotional and psychological benefits of being part of a close-knit community are well documented. Research on social cohesion has shown that individuals who feel supported by their communities are more likely to experience faster recovery times and better overall health outcomes. This aligns closely with what indigenous healing traditions have known for centuries, that health is deeply connected to the strength of the community. In fact, the healing power of community is increasingly being recognized in modern medicine. Holistic health practices, which consider the physical, emotional, and social aspects of healing, are becoming more common, and some hospitals and health centers are adopting practices that emphasize the importance of emotional and spiritual care. This shift toward a more community-focused approach reflects the growing recognition that the mind and body are interconnected, and that healing requires more than just a physical remedy, it requires emotional and social support as well. In indigenous communities, this approach to healing also involves the integration of nature. Healing doesn't take place in isolation. It takes place in the context of the land, the environment, and the community. The healing process is seen as part of a larger cycle of life, where everything is interconnected. When someone is ill, they are not seen as being separate from the environment. They are part of it. This is why indigenous healing practices often involve rituals or ceremonies that take place outdoors, in natural settings, where the individual can connect with the earth and the elements. The belief is that nature itself has healing properties, and by being in tune with the natural world, an individual can restore balance and health. Incorporating nature into the healing process is something that many modern wellness practices are beginning to recognize. The rise of ecotherapy and nature-based healing reflects this shift toward understanding that our connection with the natural world plays a crucial role in our physical and mental health. Whether it's through forest bathing, gardening, or simply spending time outdoors, nature has a restorative effect on the body and mind. Indigenous peoples have known this for millennia, and now, as we turn to nature-based therapies, we are starting to realize just how profound this connection truly is. Historians still argue about the precise ways in which communal healing traditions evolved across different indigenous cultures, and how much of the healing process was influenced by spiritual beliefs versus practical remedies. What is undeniable, however, is that the role of community in healing is an essential component of indigenous medicine. It is a reminder that we are not isolated individuals but part of a larger, interconnected world, where our health is tied to the health of those around us and the environment we live in. The lesson from modern society is clear. While medical science continues to advance, and we've made incredible strides in understanding the human body and treating diseases, we cannot overlook the power of community and the importance of emotional, psychological, and spiritual health. Healing is not just about curing the body, it's about restoring balance in all aspects of life. It's about coming together, supporting each other, and recognizing that true health is achieved when we are all connected, in harmony with one another and the world around us. We turn our attention to the preservation of indigenous healing knowledge and the challenges that come with ensuring this wisdom is not lost to modern society. Indigenous healing practices, like many aspects of indigenous culture, face the threat of being erased, overlooked, or forgotten as the world rapidly modernizes. The knowledge passed down through generations, whether it's about plants, animals, rituals, or healing techniques, is a fragile resource. As the world changes and the traditional ways of life are disrupted by urbanization, climate change, and the pressures of the globalized economy, these practices are at risk. The question then becomes, how can we preserve this invaluable knowledge while respecting the rights and culture of indigenous peoples? For centuries, indigenous healers have relied on a deep, experiential relationship with the land around them. Their understanding of plants, herbs, and natural remedies is rooted in a profound connection to nature, passed down orally through stories, ceremonies, and personal teaching. These practices are not just based on the physical properties of plants, they are embedded in the cultural and spiritual fabric of the community. When a young healer is trained, it's not just about memorizing the medicinal uses of certain herbs, it's about understanding the relationship between the land, the people, and the spirits that inhabit both. This knowledge is shared through storytelling, in which the plant's medicinal properties are not just listed, but framed within a narrative that conveys the deeper wisdom behind its use. However, with the pressures of globalization and the decline of traditional lifestyles, much of this knowledge has been lost or at risk of disappearing. Deforestation, industrial agriculture, and urbanization have all contributed to the erasure of the ecosystems where many medicinal plants once thrived. As these environments shrink or change, the plants themselves become more difficult to access, making it harder for indigenous healers to continue their practices. At the same time, the displacement of indigenous peoples due to modern political and economic forces has led to the fragmentation of communities that once upheld this knowledge. In some cases, entire languages, often the carriers of this wisdom, are in danger of being lost, taking with them centuries of invaluable information about plants, animals, and healing practices. The loss of biodiversity is another factor that threatens the survival of these practices. As more species of plants and animals become endangered or extinct, the very resources that indigenous communities depend on for healing are being depleted. For example, in the Amazon rainforest, plants like Sasha inchi, Madico, and ayahuasca are under threat due to deforestation and illegal logging. These plants, which have been used for centuries in traditional medicine, are becoming increasingly difficult to find in their natural habitats. As a result, not only are these plants becoming less available, but the traditional practices associated with their use are also at risk of fading away. Historians and scientists agree that documentation is crucial if we are to preserve these healing practices. However, the process of documenting indigenous knowledge raises complex ethical issues. While modern science and anthropology have made great strides in documenting traditional knowledge, the very act of documentation can be problematic. Indigenous peoples have long been wary of outsiders taking their knowledge without permission, particularly when that knowledge is used without compensation or respect for its cultural significance. In some cases, the documentation of this knowledge has led to biopiracy, where companies exploit indigenous remedies for profit without giving credit to the people who discovered them. This brings us to the ethical question of ownership and control over indigenous knowledge. Who owns traditional knowledge, and how can it be shared without exploitation? How can we ensure that indigenous communities have control over how their healing knowledge is used and distributed? These are questions that need to be addressed if we are to respect the rights of indigenous peoples and protect their cultural heritage. The answer is not straightforward, and it requires collaboration, dialogue, and a deep understanding of the importance of cultural preservation. At the same time, there is a growing recognition that indigenous knowledge can play an important role in addressing global health challenges. As modern medicine faces increasing pressure to address chronic illnesses, mental health issues, and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, many are turning to traditional knowledge for inspiration. Indigenous healing practices are based on a holistic view of health, one that sees the body as part of a larger system that includes emotional, spiritual, and environmental factors. This is in stark contrast to the more reductionist approach of Western medicine, which often isolates disease from the broader context of the person's life. In this way, indigenous knowledge can offer fresh insights into how we might approach wellness, healing, and disease prevention in the modern world. The recent surge in interest in natural remedies and alternative medicine has brought some of this indigenous knowledge to the forefront. More and more people are turning to herbal supplements, essential oils, and other plant-based remedies that were first used by indigenous peoples. This interest is helping to raise awareness about the importance of preserving indigenous healing practices, and many indigenous communities are now working with scientists, conservationists, and cultural preservationists to protect their traditional knowledge and ensure it is passed down to future generations. But preserving this knowledge goes beyond the act of documentation or commercialization. It's about ensuring that the cultural context in which this knowledge exists is also preserved. Indigenous healing practices are deeply rooted in the spiritual and cultural life of the community. They are not just about treating illness. They are about connecting to the land, the ancestors, and the spirit world. Without this cultural context, the practice of healing loses much of its meaning. As we work to preserve indigenous knowledge, we must also work to protect the languages, cultures, and communities that sustain this knowledge. This requires a holistic approach to preservation, one that respects the rights and values of indigenous peoples while also recognizing the profound contributions they can make to the world. One of the most exciting developments in this area is the rise of indigenous-led initiatives to protect and share traditional knowledge. Indigenous peoples are increasingly taking control of their own cultural heritage, setting up organizations, cultural centers, and legal frameworks to protect their knowledge and intellectual property. These initiatives aim to preserve traditional healing practices while ensuring that they are used in ways that respect the rights and sovereignty of indigenous peoples. Through these efforts, we are seeing a shift in how indigenous knowledge is viewed, moving from a historical artifact to a living, evolving practice that has relevance and value in the modern world. Preserving indigenous healing knowledge is not just about saving plants and remedies, it's about preserving the spiritual, cultural, and ecological knowledge that these practices are built upon. It's about recognizing the wisdom that has been developed over thousands of years and ensuring that this knowledge is not lost as the world changes. The ultimate goal should be a world where traditional healing practices are integrated into the broader fabric of global health, where indigenous communities are able to protect their knowledge, and where the contributions of indigenous peoples are valued and respected. It's clear that the preservation of indigenous healing knowledge is not just about safeguarding remedies, it's about honoring a worldview that sees the interconnectedness of all things, where health, culture, and the environment are inseparable. In a time when the world is facing numerous challenges from climate change to health crises, perhaps the greatest gift we can receive from indigenous healing is the reminder that true wellness comes from balance, respect, and connection, principles that are just as important today as they were when they were first passed down through generations. We turn our attention to the preservation of indigenous healing knowledge and the challenges that come with ensuring this wisdom is not lost to modern society. Indigenous healing practices, like many aspects of indigenous culture, face the threat of being erased, overlooked, or forgotten as the world rapidly modernizes. The knowledge passed down through generations, whether it's about plants, animals, rituals, or healing techniques, is a fragile resource. As the world changes and the traditional ways of life are disrupted by urbanization, climate change, and the pressures of the globalized economy, these practices are at risk. The question then becomes, how can we preserve this invaluable knowledge while respecting the rights and culture of indigenous peoples? For centuries, indigenous healers have relied on a deep, experiential relationship with the land around them. Their understanding of plants, herbs, and natural remedies is rooted in a profound connection to nature, passed down orally through stories, ceremonies, and personal teaching. These practices are not just based on the physical properties of plants, they are embedded in the cultural and spiritual fabric of the community. When a young healer is trained, it's not just about memorizing the medicinal uses of certain herbs, it's about understanding the relationship between the land, the people, and the spirits that inhabit both. This knowledge is shared through storytelling, in which the plant's medicinal properties are not just listed, but framed within a narrative that conveys the deeper wisdom behind its use. However, with the pressures of globalization and the decline of traditional lifestyles, much of this knowledge has been lost or at risk of disappearing. Deforestation, industrial agriculture, and urbanization have all contributed to the erasure of the ecosystems where many medicinal plants once thrived. As these environments shrink or change, the plants themselves become more difficult to access, making it harder for indigenous healers to continue their practices. At the same time, the displacement of indigenous peoples due to modern political and economic forces has led to the fragmentation of communities that once upheld this knowledge. In some cases, entire languages, often the carriers of this wisdom, are in danger of being lost, taking with them centuries of invaluable information about plants, animals, and healing practices. The loss of biodiversity is another factor that threatens the survival of these practices. As more species of plants and animals become endangered or extinct, the very resources that indigenous communities depend on for healing are being depleted. For example, in the Amazon rainforest, plants like Sasha inchi, Matico, and ayahuasca are under threat due to deforestation and illegal logging. These plants, which have been used for centuries in traditional medicine, are becoming increasingly difficult to find in their natural habitats. As a result, not only are these plants becoming less available, but the traditional practices associated with their use are also at risk of fading away. Historians and scientists agree that documentation is crucial if we are to preserve these healing practices. However, the process of documenting indigenous knowledge raises complex ethical issues. While modern science and anthropology have made great strides in documenting traditional knowledge, the very act of documentation can be problematic. Indigenous peoples have long been wary of outsiders taking their knowledge without permission, particularly when that knowledge is used without compensation or respect for its cultural significance. In some cases, the documentation of this knowledge has led to biopiracy, where companies exploit indigenous remedies for profit without giving credit to the people who discovered them. This brings us to the ethical question of ownership and control over indigenous knowledge. Who owns traditional knowledge, and how can it be shared without exploitation? How can we ensure that indigenous communities have control over how their healing knowledge is used and distributed? These are questions that need to be addressed if we are to respect the rights of indigenous peoples and protect their cultural heritage. The answer is not straightforward, and it requires collaboration, dialogue, and a deep understanding of the importance of cultural preservation. At the same time, there is a growing recognition that indigenous knowledge can play an important role in addressing global health challenges. As modern medicine faces increasing pressure to address chronic illnesses, mental health issues, and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, many are turning to traditional knowledge for inspiration. Indigenous healing practices are based on a holistic view of health, one that sees the body as part of a larger system that includes emotional, spiritual, and environmental factors. This is in stark contrast to the more reductionist approach of Western medicine, which often isolates disease from the broader context of the person's life. In this way, indigenous knowledge can offer fresh insights into how we might approach wellness, healing, and disease prevention in the modern world. The recent surge in interest in natural remedies and alternative medicine has brought some of this indigenous knowledge to the forefront. More and more people are turning to herbal supplements, essential oils, and other plant-based remedies that were first used by indigenous peoples. This interest is helping to raise awareness about the importance of preserving indigenous healing practices, and many indigenous communities are now working with scientists, conservationists, and cultural preservationists to protect their traditional knowledge and ensure it is passed down to future generations. But preserving this knowledge goes beyond the act of documentation or commercialization. It's about ensuring that the cultural context in which this knowledge exists is also preserved. Indigenous healing practices are deeply rooted in the spiritual and cultural life of the community. They are not just about treating illness, they are about connecting to the land, the ancestors, and the spirit world. Without this cultural context, the practice of healing loses much of its meaning. As we work to preserve indigenous knowledge, we must also work to protect the languages, cultures, and communities that sustain this knowledge. This requires a holistic approach to preservation, one that respects the rights and values of indigenous peoples while also recognizing the profound contributions they can make to the world. In closing, the legacy of indigenous healing is not something of the past, but something that continues to shape our present and future. It is a legacy of resilience, wisdom, and connection that we can draw upon in our modern lives. By honoring and preserving these practices, we can ensure that the healing wisdom of indigenous peoples remains alive and relevant for generations to come.